Hello, everyone, and welcome to Schmidt List Live. I am your host, Kurt Schmidt, president and partner at Foundry. And today's show, well, we're going to be talking about the future. We're going to be talking about VR and AR, virtual reality, augmented reality, with my friend Nick Roseth, who knows probably more than most of us will ever want to know about it. But he's going to explain to us a lot about what we need to be thinking about in these spaces from a technology perspective, but also from a business opportunity perspective. Like, what are some of those opportunities out there? Speaking of opportunities, segue, we are hiring at Foundry. So check it out. foundrymakes.com/careers. We're hiring all the folks. So if you're interested or you know someone, send them our way. It's a great place to work. We hit the Inc. 5,000 fastest growing companies for the second year in a row this year. So get on the rocket ship. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. Speaking of, another segue. Nick, how are you today?
Good. Thanks, Kurt.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So tell me about the work you do, Nick. Where are you at, and what sort of work do you do?
Sure. So I've been doing consulting in this innovation space. Been on a bit of a roller coaster the past few years in the startup world, including a couple of years in the AR specifically, and just work with companies that are looking, to identify these technologies and how they can incorporate them into their business, and really part of their digital transformation for what's their business going to look like for the next 5 or 10 years. As technology is changing very quickly.
It sure is. All right. Well, so let's jump right in to talk about the different types of realities, right?
Yep.
So we've got virtual reality, which has been around for a long time. I remember, Minority Report, Johnny Mnemonic, we were promised this stuff a long time ago, that this was just going to be part of our daily lives, the idea of virtual spaces that we live in. And then over the last, 10 years or so, augmented reality has really started to take off more now that Apple's got LiDAR in their phones and things like that. So let's just tell me about, imagine somebody watching that doesn't really, they understand a bit of the fundamentals, but tell me the basic differences between the two technologies.
Sure. The new buzzword these days is XR, and it's kind of this umbrella that sits over really the spectrum between VR and AR. And so the kind of the business case I like to think of with something like the spectrum between VR and AR is that if you're in the architecture and AEC, architecture, engineering, and construction perspective, if we look at that as a use case, when you're designing something brand new, you're designing it in VR. Because there's no reality you need to see. You need to be fully immersed in this brand new experience.
Yeah.
So architects will design that upfront in VR. And the closer you get towards breaking ground and actually having something as a backdrop, you want to start getting it more integrated into mixed reality and augmented reality. And so engineering firms, they want to see what's behind, what's out there. And then they want to have those 3D holograms embedded on top of that. So that's why it's called augmented reality, and that you're still looking at reality, but we're now augmenting it with additional stuff that's inside of it. Mixed reality is kind of like Microsoft's version of interacting with that. So if you think about augmented reality, is we're going to put some additional information in kind of in front of your world. Maybe some, if you're out for a run, maybe we take the information that's on your phone and we put it into your glasses. And so you can constantly see, how fast you're going. Whereas with something like mixed reality, you're really interacting with things. Okay.
Makes sense. So if I'm, again, going back to the idea of virtual reality being around a long time, and, the hard stuff that it's been with, this idea of wearing this giant machine on your head. I remember, again, I'm dating myself, but, when I first got our first VHS recorder, you had to carry around the VCR with you as you had the recorder. That's what it seemed like virtual reality kind of turned into. And now we've had iterations. We've had Google Glass kind of taking a stab at it, and now Facebook has just released this idea of virtual workspaces as well, right? So So if I'm a business and I'm looking at the idea of adding this to my space, and it could be in so many different areas, right? Where do you see, what areas of the world besides maybe some of the obvious like real estate, do you see VR and AR starting to really take hold?
Sure. So I think there's a whole bunch of different areas in both the consumer side that will probably be a little bit of a longer tail.
Mm-hmm.
Enterprise is leveraging this a lot right now. One of those biggest applications is going to be in training. So creating virtual environments that you would otherwise, if you need to train a workforce across the globe, you've got a lot invested in people training people. So if you can create, training materials for doing engineering tasks or, safety training for construction, manufacturing is a really great example of where it's been actually utilized for years to show the parts of how something is, broken apart. So if you need to put together a 10,000 piece, air conditioner from Trane or somebody like that, virtual reality and augmented reality are great opportunities to do kind of this step-by-step instruction and training. So training is definitely one of the biggest applications, I think, more so in VR, but becoming more and more in AR. Other industry verticals are starting to more and more become things like fashion and retail. So more and more in virtual reality, especially during COVID, these technologies have started to increase in adoption because you really have no alternatives, right? So fashion shows have gone into virtual worlds now where you're still doing fashion shows, but people are kind of logging in to be a part of that. Concerts are another one. So there's been a lot of recent investments, I believe, with Sony or somebody just put a couple $100 million into a company that is doing streaming concerts, and artists are getting paid millions of dollars because the audience has gone from 50,000 people you can fit into a stadium to millions online. So entertainment, fashion, I think those are starting to become more online as we go through things. Healthcare is another one here, obviously in Minnesota that we're interested in. AEC, so industry, the architecture and construction has been used for a number of years. But I think more and more we're going to see those applications, for instance, something like maintenance and the ability to kind of see through walls in the construction space. So when you have the construction model, you hand that off to the property manager or the property owner, and they can see now, X-ray vision behind walls where the studs are, where the electrical is, and all of those kinds of things. So I think it's one of those long curves because, yes, I think a lot of people would say it's been around for a while. But I think if you're in the industry and you're looking at it, it's really just getting started. Like the long-term potential, the technology is starting to get small enough where it's not necessarily massive, headgear. And, Facebook is working very hard, investing, millions and billions of dollars into getting us so we can have a pair of glasses. And they're doing partnerships with Ray-Ban and so forth. So I think over the next 10 years, it's really going to come into a much larger maturity across audiences.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, obviously. I mean, like we said, we've seen it in movies for a long time, everything from police work and surgery to, firefighting, construction, all those different things. I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's taken a lot of time for the technology to really catch up with our imagination, which is interesting because, I remember 20 years ago, I mean, technology would surprise us pretty regularly, right? And I feel like that's what's so odd about the whole VR, AR space is that our imaginations are kind of running wild, but the technology is struggling to keep up. Whereas before, we had we had computers in our pocket, but it took a long time to figure out what the actual power of those things could be. And so let me ask you from a business owner's perspective, right? Let's say I'm in one of those industries you kind of mentioned, and maybe I am interested. Let's just say training, for example. Like that seems like a pretty easy one to talk about. what should I be exploring or understanding before I call up Nick and say, "Hey, Nick, how can you get me into some VR today?"
Yep.
What sort of inventory or stock should I be taking of what I have in my business right now?
Sure. I think a lot of things that people don't, everybody looks at fancy new technology and they're like, oh, we want to get it, and I'm sure
Yep.
you guys hear it all the time. Like, hey, I want an app, especially
Yep.
during the mobile craze. It was always, the first question was always, well, why do you want an app?
Right.
So the first thing I would say for anybody in the business space is going to be to properly identify the business problems you're trying to solve, and start there. So if you're trying to solve how can we leverage this technology to either improve our safety or to improve our training, maybe to reduce the training budget, or if you're looking at the consumer side, how do we get them more information? Really focus on the business objectives. In the construction space, the massive, one of the biggest problems is the amount of waste that happens in that world is kind of insane.
Yeah.
And so part of what the landscape of companies, especially in the AR space, are trying to do is just to deliver way more information, way more quickly. And so if you look at it in the perspective of they're still using two-dimensional plans and writing stuff on sticky notes, right? So imagine being able, the eyes are the biggest pipes into the brain. And so if you can put AR on them and have them walk around a construction site and have them see things much more obvious, then I think that's kind of another component of understanding the technology. Look at your landscape and say, is it VR, right? It's a spectrum. It's a continuum of from VR to AR. What's going to, apply? And again, that's where I help folks try to understand this stuff. But starting with the business problem, understanding the potential impact, like can we drop a third of our training cost, if we adopt a technology like this? Yeah. And then you also have to consider the other side of it, which is, somebody's got to maintain these devices. And so really identifying the potential upside, and then any of the costs associated with it. And also, I think it would be important to kind of see what your peers in the industry are doing, right? Yeah. So if you're looking around in healthcare, what are those companies doing? And then, in construction or in manufacturing, there's so many use cases out there that you can go through and talk about, what's Walmart going to do with the headsets that they just bought. If you're Target, you're probably looking at, peers like that in the industry, or startups. Startups have lots of ideas that big companies can't necessarily move that quickly on. So just being aware of the options out there, I think would be kind of one of the third, pillars that I would be standing on as I look out on this landscape.
Makes sense. What about one of the things that we found really helpful in the work that we do in like you mentioned, the application design space is prototyping. Prototyping has been a big thing for us in order to test these applications before we go down the road of building them. Is there good ways to prototype these experiences that are out there? How would you suggest somebody maybe who's interested in that space looks at maybe, like you said, they did that first step and now they'd like to prototype what that might look like? What does that look like for in the VR AR space? Sure.
I think there's kind of a stair-step approach to this, right? You can imagine, right? You could take a picture and draw it on a napkin and say, well, wouldn't it be cool if I had this, piece of data in front of me on my glasses, at all times. So, you can start from just the early conceptual stage on whiteboards. But then I think if you start getting into an actual, idea, the one thing that is a challenge is content. I think most businesses don't understand and appreciate the cost of content when it comes to something like this. That's just again and again, conferences I've been to, people I've talked to, it's always about high quality content, whether we're talking about apps that you can actually download or libraries of stuff. So, understanding the scale, appreciating that, and then just drawing it out like a project plan, like you would on a mobile app or a website or a proposal, is to say, here are the components that we need. And then you can engage somebody like myself or, a shop to say, hey, I've got these ideas. I need to turn them into a prototype. And so if you're talking in virtual reality, you're going to pull in some 3D content creators. If you're talking about application development, you're going to pull in, similar. There's more software coming out every day that make that process a little bit easier. So content creation is, I'd say, fairly rapidly becoming easier and more accessible. You're starting to see more libraries of stuff where you can just plug in and say, oh, I need a couch here and a person there. Those are becoming easier. And then I think online content creation, some of the barriers are coming down for those for a variety of different companies. So prototyping is becoming easier, but I'd say it's definitely, from everyone I've talked to, from the small business up to the enterprise, that is, that's part of the path, is doing the prototyping to get the buy-in, because the buy-in at the business level is one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah. What about people that are interested in getting into the space as a career, right? So it sounds like you've already identified kind of two paths, right? One is like that engineering path, but also then there's the content and artistic marketing / creation side of it, right? I mean, is this one of those things? Well, you probably can't get a master's degree in VR tech, can you?
Well, yeah, it's kind of like a lot of tech out there. It's still pretty early to see any sort of, AR or VR programs. A lot of, the specific programs, maybe like construction, for instance, they're starting to slowly kind of feather in some of these concepts of virtual construction. If you're a lot of VR, XR related stuff comes out of the game industry. So artistic and creative, 3D modeling. There are certainly schools out there that are doing that. There's a lot more online content that's coming out. So, if you're looking at the development side, Unity and Unreal engines, those would be, good kind of application stacks. And that's where the rubber meets the road in some of those things.
Unity is something I've heard a lot about. Yeah, not just from a VR, AR, but to your point about gaming, even in some of the mobile things that we've done.
Yep. So Unity is huge, and Unreal. There's a couple different flavors. A lot of stuff is being built out on Steam VR, and there's a number of different platforms that are going to kind of range from, as I would tell a developer, like, are you on the more creative side or are you on the more, development side? And then you just kind of pick the spectrum and say, all right, I'd love to be kind of in this, overall area. And that might be anything from, back-end cloud development is going to be a part of this. You're going to have to store these assets somewhere. So, web engineers and DevOps folks, I mean, it's going to be if you really want to build a cloud-based platform, where I think the majority of these apps are going to be built from streaming content, interacting, downloading stuff. It's going to be the whole spectrum, everything from that back-end development all the way up through 3D modeling.
And then what about, so we've kind of talked about present day a little bit. What about what can we expect next? I mean, Facebook, usually doesn't invest in something like this just casually at that scale. I mean, Amazon does, right? I mean, they'll do Amazon will be like, we're going to do this new phones. And then, no, never mind. But Facebook doesn't seem to do that too often. So what is that announcement in your mind done in this space for VR, AR, when a company, one of the biggest companies in the world, says we're investing, $1 billion into this stuff? Does it send ripples across? Does it make people start to wake up more to the idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think in both the business side and the consumer side, one of the things, across the industry, I think, is like, who's actually using this stuff and how are they using it, right? So the announcement that a company like Facebook is saying this is the future is significant. And they're investing in a number of different areas. If you go to the Facebook Reality Labs website, job site, it is crazy how many people like how many hundreds of people they are hiring, everything from PhDs in human psychology on down to, front end developers and 3D modeling. So their investment is huge, I think, from both the software side, as we've seen with some recent announcements with their meeting rooms in Horizon, and as well as hardware. So I think, Zuckerberg sounds all in on this, and he could, as the big buzzword is today, is Metaverse. So I think the Metaverse is kind of, somebody had explained it as, it's kind of like in the early days of the internet where they would refer to it as the information superhighway, right?
Yes.
It's this abstract idea. Somebody thinks that it's going to be one thing. I think there's going to be companies like Facebook that want to try to capitalize and make, as much of their own metaverse as they can. But I've also referred, I believe it's going to be more like the multiverse, where it's going to be a lot of different companies and a lot of different, at both a business level and consumer, are all going to have kind of these virtual aspects that are going to be feathered into our reality along that spectrum. So like in virtual worlds, imagine being able to, go to IKEA virtually, and be able to cruise through it and make it feel like it's an actual store experience. But you can do that in VR, and at the same time, you can grab their couch and see what it looks like in your living room. So there's definitely going to be this spectrum. I think hardware is also going to be evolving. The number of headsets coming out just in the past 12 months is pretty crazy. The number of companies doing, online, virtual meetings and collaboration, Spatial among others. Spatial just came out with a big update today. Those have the number of those has increased dramatically. So I think the pandemic has certainly, created a lot of potential for entrepreneurs and folks looking to get into.
It's been an accelerant for a lot of industries. Yeah,
it's a necessity is the mother of invention. And so I think that, this industry was certainly, to me, it's inevitable. I think COVID kind of sped it up a little bit.
Yeah. I got a question from Britta here. I'm going to pull it up for you. So she asked, what if someone wants to invest in this tech, but doesn't want to work in the space?
Sure. So I think there's actually, there's various levels of, the term invest, right? But there are more, there's one that just came out. I think it's called Meta. So there are, things like ETFs and, these companies that are being aggregated together. So for one would be like, Unity is a company, that's going to be one of the pillars. Companies like Autodesk are going to be, involved in building out the construction cloud, as they call it. You look at these companies that are doing avatars. If you look at, there's a project called MetaHumans through Unity, and it's like getting to be like the Matrix, realism. Some of these headsets, the headsets, if you look at the companies who are building headsets, Microsoft is definitely going to be a big part of that. Yeah. Facebook's going to be a big part of that. HP, HTC, I think it's just a matter of watching where the money's going in this space, and then, just keeping up to date on, what are sales figures for X. And I think there's a ton of opportunity from an investment perspective in this space, because it's again, we're still early, and I don't think, a lot of people really understand that, but it's one of those, it's like the phone. So, it took us years to really adapt to the phone.
Yep.
But if you think about things like AR, right now, society is getting trained in on AR in our phones. Eventually, the hardware is going to meet a point where we can actually put it on our faces without looking goofy. And I think once that happens, you've got technologies and this convergence between things like AI, machine learning, and AR and 5G, where the tech is only going to become more and more a part of us, and so there's, that is where I think things start to kind of really change. It becomes a little closer to Minority Report. Like there's, AR is going to show up in cars. It already is. So
Yeah.
cars are being sold today where AR is starting to come into play. If we're talking about windshields or, just like what you're able to see in Teslas or something. So
Yeah. Yep.
it's going to we're going to be immersed in this more and more in the coming years.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you. We touched on that future state, but I think the real barrier again has been the hardware side of this. Is that when the Apple Watch came out, it took a while for it to really start to catch on. It didn't have the biggest splash in the beginning, but over time, it started to build up more speed. And I think Google Glass, again, that wasn't like they were betting everything on it, but still, I think in order to get past that barrier, it's got to be something where people are going to want to have it on them at all times,
Right.
And I think that's been one of the biggest barriers forever, and that's why we had phones, shrinking in size, and then now they're bigger and like it's all over the place, right?
Right. Yeah. And like I said, I think it's a big part of this is cultural.
Yeah.
So much of the world has been already solved by technology. It's just a matter of humans being able to catch up with it or try to integrate it into them. So I think, I look at it this way. So my 9-year-old lives and breathes in Minecraft. And I think about, myself, I grew up with, the original Sega system and Commodore 64 and Nintendo. And this is the industry I'm in. This is kind of the flag I'm carrying moving forward. Imagine what she's going to do, when she is in her 20s and 30s, and the worlds that she's going to build because she's been immersed in a 3D world,
right.
Pretty much her entire life.
Yeah.
So I think that, over time, younger generations, especially as they see this stuff, like I said, with AR, there's going to be a certain point where people aren't going to know what a world without AR looks like. And then imagine kind of what that world looks like, 10 to 20 years from now.
I love it. There's, for over the years, you mentioned Microsoft. There's been military applications for this too. And, the internet was a military investment, right? So, one of the things I've always said is like, if you want to see where kind of world's going, you can look at the military in some ways as the people that are pushing the envelope when it comes to technology. So, everything from supercomputers and virtual reality, I think, is also a great place to keep an eye on. I think was it Microsoft that won big contract with them, with the government?
Yep. So they got the big contract. They signed it last year, or they kind of announced it last year, and then they, checked it off this year. But it was a couple $1 billion or some crazy amount, and it was for their IVAS platform where they're integrating a Microsoft HoloLens into helmets. Mm-hmm. And I heard folks at a conference say that one contract doubled the size of the augmented reality industry globally. So,
I'd believe it.
It's still a small industry, right? But you've got massive investment from the U.S. military. And what's interesting is, if you go through their, they've got kind of these startup kind of integration points into them, AFWorks and some of these other programs that are kind of meant to be entrepreneurial thing. Yeah. And they post their needs. And right now, if you're interested in this space, like the U.S. military has effectively asked people to help them build out an AR ecosystem. And so contractors can go there and check this stuff out. There's lots of opportunity. The military is one whole kind of branch of the entire spectrum of businesses out there that is trying to figure out how to use this crazy new, technology. So that was a pretty big deal.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I mean is it seems to be, to your point, it seems to be the speed is getting greater than it's ever been with contracts like Microsoft's, with Facebook's big announcement, this isn't just the startup community, doing drone chasing anymore, drone races anymore. It's,
Right.
they're really pushing that to become part of the new standard. And I'm excited about it. I think it makes a lot of sense, like you'd mentioned. But again, it's a cultural thing, right? If we didn't have cell phones and then they introduced the iPhone, it would have taken a lot longer to take hold, and so the idea of like that first person you saw walking around with a Google Glass a few years ago, you're kind of like, are they recording me?
Well, yeah, there's, and it changes a lot. Like phones are everywhere now, or, cameras are everywhere now with phones. So we've kind of started to culturally adapt to that. I think the Google Glass was just way ahead of its time and was doing something so experimental, and they learned, from the market, and a lot of others learned from that along the way. And I think what we're starting to see is critical mass around the industrial aspects of, these new technologies, where ideas feed off of other ideas, and the adoption starts to feed off of, prior adoption. And so it starts to scale, right? And then we kind of turn around and like, boom, there it is. It's like the iPhone. Like that was not an overnight hit by any means. I mean, Steve Ballmer did the famous, where he made fun of it and said, who's going to use a phone without a keyboard? Right. And so you look at stuff like that, or like the internet. Oh, it's a fad. It's just one of those things. We've been through this cycle before. And like I said, I think before people know it, they're just there it is. Yeah. It's just part of your life. And it's just a whole different way of looking at things. And it's a much more immersive integration with technology. And that's where I'm super excited. It's solving a lot of problems we have not been able to kind of overcome in a lot of ways.
Well, I think that's the exciting thing about it. And I think that's what Apple is doing great with the LiDAR, is because instead of forcing you to buy additional devices to carry around with you, how can we start to integrate it into the things that we already have, right? Like you mentioned, cars, your phone, whatever, your home computer, tablets, things like that. Is a great place to sort of integrate it into there before you start going and sticking, big glasses on people's faces with a camera on them,
Right.
Because it's a privacy thing is going to just keep expanding into that, right? Like you had mentioned, being able to see what's behind walls and things that have been, even though it's been documented and it's public, it's still, there's a lot of things that are going to have to be considered there as well in the future. And that's where I see, a lot of interesting things happening. But I think of how, for a long time in Russia, the dashboard cam has been such a standard thing, and now it's catching on even more in America, right? Like you've got some pretty amazing pieces of technology there that, are just become more standard. Yeah,
no. Can you still see me? Did I freeze up here?
I can see you froze, but I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I don't know what. Let me try restarting my eCam thing here, really quick. See if that does anything. I think one of the things to think about, like Apple. You mentioned Apple. Once Apple gets into this game, I think they're very cautious about getting into these types of things, and so. When they do get in, they're going to be ready for it.
Did I lose you, Dick? I might have lost you. He might be gone. Where could he have gone?
There, can you see me now? All right.
I see him. He's back.
Can you hear me?
There he is. He switched cameras on me.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I can't hear you now, but I can see you.
How about now?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Nope. Still nothing. This is the beauty of live, folks. Welcome to my world. It's exciting. It's never quite what you think it's going to be.
All right, how about now?
All right, so Nick is there.
Can you hear me?
His mouth is moving. He's looking.
Okay, how about now?
Yep.
Now.
Nope.
Now.
Do some lip reading for you all for Nick. You know, I think VR is great. Oh, I love this. Oh, and he dropped off. He'll back. Oh, the audience can hear both of us? Oh, well, all right. Thanks, Nathan. Hang on 1 second. We're going to add him in here again. That's very helpful. I'm glad Nathan is there. Now we can't hear him. Oh, there we go. Hang on.
Okay. Can you hear me now? How about now? How about now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
You can hear me now.
Yes, you're back.
Okay. All right.
All right.
All right. Sorry about that.
Nope. It's okay. This is the fun of live, and we've had Britta and Nathan enjoying the enjoying our pain. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
No,
So
I was going to say.
Please.
Based on what you were saying, so you mentioned Apple.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about some of the players that are investing money into this thing, Apple, Facebook, you know, Apple makes decisions very meticulously. So when they come in, I think they're going to come in pretty big. And if you look at sales of AirPods, for instance, right, the amount of revenue coming off of AirPods is crazy because it's solving a problem in a completely different way. Things like spatial audio that they recently released, and I think it's all about our human experience.
Yeah.
And it's about integrating technologies in a variety of different ways. So it's like, you know, if you think about AirPods is hitting our, you know, sense of hearing, right? And then the eventual, you know, glasses from Apple are going to, you know, be the sight component of that, but it's going to be super integrated with things like AirPods, right? Because it's all part of this ecosystem. So that's where I see like things like, you know, Minority Report, where eventually you're able to see different marketing in the same location than somebody else. Like that sci-fi stuff is going to happen, just like rocket ships and trips to Mars are right now. So it's pretty exciting as that stuff starts to come together. But again, companies like, you know, Facebook or Apple, the U.S. military, I mean, so many of those things are all pointing to our, you know, effective future in a kind of a new extended reality, which is what XR stands for.
So the big question I know everybody is waiting for you to answer, Nick, is when do I get my jetpack?
Oh, I'm excited. Have you seen some of the new drones integration? Like the U.S. military is doing some super cool stuff. They've got jetpacks on their. I think they're on their hands now, right? Where
yes. Yeah, they're like Iron Man.
Oh, it's cool. It's cool.
It's super cool. All right, Nick. Well, you came back just in time for us to wrap this up. So if I want to know more, if I have questions about the AR VR space and I want to know more about them, where's a great place to find you, to connect with you, to follow? And you've got an event coming up too, right?
Yes. Yeah. So one of the exciting things is I joined a group, an online, actually a global group of about 30,000 folks in, it's called VRARA, the Virtual Reality Augmented Reality Association. So I am officially spinning up a chapter here in Minneapolis. Our first event is going to be a happy hour during Twin Cities Startup Week on September 22nd at 5 p.m. So you can find more info on that at the Twin Cities Startup Week page, or you can follow our group on LinkedIn, VRARA Minneapolis. You can track me down on LinkedIn or Twitter at Nick Roseth, or the VRARA Minneapolis, or explore xplr.design.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thanks for joining me. Let's plan to have you back on to catch up when the next big announcement comes on and we can talk about it.
Sounds great. Always a pleasure, Kurt.
Thanks. Talk soon. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking with us during that little hiccup that we had there. Yep. A little hiccup. It's okay. It's all right. Did I mention we're hiring? Yes, I should have mentioned we're hiring. Check it out. FoundryMakes.com/careers. Always new jobs going up all the time. So keep an eye on that page. Thank you for taking the time to join me. I should mention, check out, just like Nick had mentioned, Twin City Startup Week. I'm going to be speaking there as well with a number of other podcasters. So it's going to be fun. So we hope to see you there. Thanks for taking the time to join me today. I appreciate you. Have a great week.